And we're live. Hello,
Excellent.
all out there. I'm here with Jeff Gothelf. I'm so delighted to be with you, Jeff. I've been looking forward to this conversation for many weeks since we spoke about it. Hello, all. If you're here live, feel free to hop into the chat and say hello to us. We also would love to answer your questions and read your comments as we unpack this conversation on Forever Employable. Jeff is the author of said book, Forever Employable. Stop looking for work and let your next job find you. Hoop, there it is. And I really enjoyed having a chance to get to meet and know Jeff over the past, I think, year or so. Jeff,
Yeah,
it's
it's been about a year.
yeah. And as I've been doing more of these lives, we thought to do one and to talk about things like the Great Resignation, the Great Talent Swap or Talent Shuffle, to talk about how to build upon one's confidence, motivation, hard work to make stuff happen such that we need not rely on others, but rely more on ourselves for our own stability, security, fulfillment, all the things. Does that sound good, Jeff?
That sounds great, and it's the right time to talk about it. It's super important.
Yes, I think it was the right time when you published the book, and it became an even righter time as
Yeah.
as as time continued here. And amazing seeing everyone joining us and saying hello. Please add some comments and questions as we go along. And for those of you joining and watching in the recording, we hope you enjoy.
Yep.
Jeff, I mean, I'm happy just to pass to you as sort of like, your opening statement. Set the stage for us in terms of what you want to bring, what the book's about, the work that you're doing to help people become forever employable.
Absolutely. So look, the thanks for having me. And it's good to be chatting again. The conversation that we had on my podcast, Forever Employable Stories, in season 1 was enlightening and was the most downloaded episode in season 1. So congratulations. Well done. Well done there. Season 2 comes out next week, and we're super excited about that. But until then, look, I've been working as a self-employed consultant, author, speaker, officially on my own for 6 years, and overall for about 10 years within the context of a consulting company that I started. And over those years, there's been an ongoing inbound stream, almost on a weekly basis. I'd say definitely on a weekly basis, almost on a daily basis, of questions. Hey, Jeff, how did you get that speaking gig? How did you get a book deal? How did you build your business? And I get these questions. Hey, can I pick your brain about this or that? And I get that a lot. And and my second book was called Sense and Response. I was sensing all of this particular inbound demand, and I responded. I said, look, you know what? I could write a blog post about this. I could write 10 blog posts about this, or I could write a book about it. And so I decided to write a short book about it. The book was Forever Employable. Really, it's semi-autobiographical, with the point being, I started my story on the day I turned 35. Rather than sort of, hey, I was born in this town to, a COBOL programmer and, that type of thing. It was but the day I turned 35, because on the day I turned 35, I actually had a bit of a panic attack on that morning, which was really strange because, I like my birthdays. I'm super happy. I'm a birthday guy. I like birthday parties. I like presents. I like the whole thing. And I had a bit of a panic attack because I was this, I was providing for my family. I had two tiny daughters, who are now 2 larger daughters, and older,
Less
and
tiny,
yeah, less tiny for sure. And married, house, couple of cars, the whole suburban New Jersey American dream type of thing. And I was really worried that in 5 years from then, I'd be 40. And for me, 40 was the end. Like, that's it. It's like everything was going to end at 40. But realistically,
that's like the peak of life, and then it's just going to go down from there.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's 5 more years and then I was out. Right. But realistically, what I was concerned about was that I would be too expensive and unemployable when I turned 40. And I was feeling this because, look, I was making a decent salary when I was 35. I was making $175,000 a year when I was 35 in New York City as the director of user experience at a high growth startup in New York. And I was hiring designers onto my team. And the designers that I was hiring were better than me. They were faster than me. They had more skills, and they were cheaper than me, a lot cheaper than me. And so I was desperately worried that in 5 years I'd be out. I'd be too expensive. There wouldn't be any work, and I'd be out. And so I resolved on that day to change my trajectory, to be deliberate about the kinds of opportunities that I generate, to make sure that I built the kind of recognition and personal brand, which is not a dirty phrase. It's not a bad phrase, right? That generated the kinds of opportunities that I wanted, and that I would always be surrounded by those opportunities. And that's what the book is about. The book is about how I did that, right? And how others did that as well. And look, the reason why I wrote this down is because my hope is that folks who read it take the initiative to do some or all of the things that I talk about in the book and generate a state at some point in the future where they are always surrounded by opportunities. And the reason for that is because so you mentioned very briefly the Great Resignation. There's that. There is the death of corporate loyalty. Really, my best friend's dad worked at DuPont for 40 years, right? Show me another person who's worked anywhere for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then there's just a tremendous amount of change. The pace of change is increasing, and there's a lot of volatility and unpredictability in the world. The last 2 years having proven a lot of that. And so how do you create a situation so that regardless of where you are in your life and where you are in your career, you're always surrounded by opportunity, so that if you get laid off, if there's a pandemic, if there's a merger or an acquisition, or a new CEO comes in,
or your boss leaves, who was your champion.
Exactly. Like there's always opportunity. Like there's something there, and that's it's such a calm place to be, right? From a mental health standpoint and from a quality of life standpoint.
Oh, beautiful.
That's really, like, if I can help people get there. So that's why I wrote the book. And that was a long story, but that's why.
Yeah, and there's a groundbreaking study that there's a fallacy that the more senior you are in the organization, the more stress you have, but it's actually you don't have more stress because you have more locus of control over your fate and destiny. And those more junior in the organization who, if the wind blows the wrong way on the Excel sheet and all of a sudden you're on the wrong side, that sort of, I think it's part of what has been so hard with COVID as well. And I know for me as a parent with 2 young kids, at any sneeze or runny nose or fever, our entire week is shot. And I think that's both a macro and micro of what you're speaking to give people agency, that they know they have worth, skills, attributes, things, opportunity within themselves and outside of themselves to pursue, regardless of what happens outside of their span of control, is what I'm picking up.
Absolutely. And I think most folks don't think that. Like, I think a lot of folks think they're good at their job. I think a lot of folks think they know what they're doing. And I think that that's true. But I also believe that we have been sold makes it sound negative. It's not negative, right? We have been taught.
There's a belief. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We've been taught to believe that there is a path, a career path. And if you follow this path, you will have a great life, right? And you know, and you know the path, because I'm sure a lot of you have followed it, and it's familiar, right? It's you know, you go to school, you graduate, you get a job, you work for a couple of years, maybe you get a promotion, maybe you make a lateral move to another company, but like every move grows a little bit. You get a little bit more money, a little bit more responsibility. Eventually, you get the corner office and the VP title, and then maybe at some point, maybe an executive leadership role, right? Something along those lines. And that path is valid and it works for a lot of people. But from my perspective, what I believe is that that path is becoming increasingly more risky and far less predictable than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's just too much change, and there's too much volatility for us to predictably say, well, if I get fired, if I get laid off, I'll just get another job, right? Comfortably. I think, and it's particularly true. I think the older that you get, I think there's some, obviously some ageism involved there as well. But, but I think that path, there are other paths, right? Or there are other things that you can do to secure that path more, to create a safety net around that path, so that if it doesn't work out the way that you planned, well, you can kind of get back on track, or you can find a new branch to follow. And that's the thing that a lot of folks, I think, don't see. I think there's this kind of this
narrow
blindness.
Yeah.
Right. I know how to do this one thing, and I don't know how to do anything else. And that's, you know, my hope is to broaden that conversation.
Yeah. Amazing. I mean, I want to make a comment on the 35-year-old thing, but I'm envisioning, Jeff, sort of this analogy of, you know, someone walking down a road with a backpack, and what you're speaking to is adding on, oh, I should probably have a water canteen. Oh, maybe I'll need crampons. Like you never know. Hey, here are some walking sticks. Like it's building that cool toolkit such that if you come across a mountain or a different path to go through, some shrub or some woods, you have the equipment, both technically and also, you know, human skills like confidence or perseverance to go do things you want to do or feel called to do, because you have the equipment, both physically and mentally, to do so.
So that's part of it. So absolutely, right. You absolutely need to have the skills. So, for example, the skills that we're talking about, just to you know, that you would be adding onto your backpack, things like storytelling, things like self-confidence, an entrepreneurial spirit. You don't necessarily have to be an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneurial spirit, right? Yep. This ability this humility to learn and to continuously improve. I think those things are there. The other sort of aspect of that is the ability to use those skills to convince people to come along with you on that journey, right? And so that in the event that for some reason, like you said, like the path gets complicated, or your journey all of a sudden there's a rock slide. We'll just carry this metaphor forever, right? There's a rock slide in front of you, a boulder in front of you, right? And you're like, crap, how do I get across this? Somebody over there says, hey, Jeff, come over here. I can help you with that. I can help you get around that, right? Yeah. And so then it's you know, it's like Forrest Gump, right? If you remember Forrest Gump, he started walking the country, and by the time he was done, all these people were kind of coming with him, right? Like I think that's the other half of it, is like bringing folks, using those skills that you pick up with you, to get folks to come along with you on this journey.
Nice. Yeah, I call that community, a group of people who agree to grow together. Or absolutely. I mean, you know, I've later been informed that things that I've been doing in my career have been networking. I thought it was just building genuine relationships with people. You know, I think networking can get a dirty word, but this notion of like, you know, oftentimes the most valuable people aren't those who are your traditional first connections on LinkedIn or those who are your strong ties. It's the weak ties or the second connections where often opportunity exists. And I'm a huge believer in, like, are you looking for a new job? Go get a haircut and talk to your barber or hairdresser, because they're a social node. Or go to your dentist, right? Like, that's someone that, like, you and I know different people. I could come to you with an issue. I mean, we're friends. We've had 3 or 4 conversations, but I've known you for a year. We share values and beliefs and some common connections, and that's about it, which is beautiful because we're not strong ties. We don't
Mm-hmm.
speak every week, but yet I
That's
could say,
right.
"Hey, Jeff, I'm rattling around with this thing, this problem, this idea. Any ideas or any connections of people who can help me with it is huge because we don't speak every week. Like
Yeah.
I now have access to the people you do speak to every week or every quarter that I previously wouldn't have access to, which I think is part of community and part of network.
One of the most valuable things that I created when I went into private practice was a small community of like employed individuals. So when I decided to break out onto my own, one of the things that I worried about was honestly just being alone and being lonely and not having anybody to bounce ideas off of, to learn from. And so I started a very small community of folks who do roughly what I do for a living, or in very, very, very closely adjacent disciplines or markets. And in the 6 years that that's been in existence, it has absolutely been the most valuable thing that I've created, because, arguably, and if you're a follower on Twitter, I don't mean this in any negative way, but arguably it's been more valuable than the 45,000 people who follow me on Twitter, right? Simply because it's exactly what you just described. I'll go in there and say, look, I've got this new client in there in industrial manufacturing. Has anyone ever done this kind of work in industrial manufacturing? Because I don't have a clue. I don't know what I'm doing to help me, right? Yeah. And then and if somebody in the group hasn't done it, they know someone who has. And be like, let me connect you with that. And so the community is amazing. In fact, I was speaking with this brilliant woman earlier today. Her name is Zoe. I think it's Skaman, Scaman. She actually never said her surname, so I don't know actually how to pronounce it, but I think it's Zoe Skaman. And she's an expert in Web3 and the kind of the future of the creator economy. And she makes a very distinct differentiation from audience to community, right? So if sort of the Web 2, the world of Facebook and Twitter, the world that we live in right now, is about building audiences, and I do talk about building an audience in Forever Employable, she talks about, so the future here is building community, right? People who are in not just, it's not a one-to-many conversation, but it's an engaged discussion amongst a group of people created to generate the kind of synergies that you just described, right? It's like, oh, nice. Yeah, I know somebody who does that thing.
Nice. And I see a couple questions and comments coming through. Please keep adding any questions you have from this conversation, and we'll highlight them very soon. I think, Jeff, this point that you make around community, having a group of people who are like-minded, have similar enough experience that can help each other out, is a game changer, whether you're in private practice, a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, or you're a middle manager at a tech company or anything. This is a time tested and true way to be successful, is to have a group of people who believe in you more than you believe in yourself sometimes, that you can lean into and go, I'm in over my head, I need help, or can I bounce an idea off you and make it better, is game changing, is absolutely game changing.
We've seen, look, I mean, there's more and more of these organizations over the years. Phil Terry's, oh my God, creative good, the councils, creative good councils that Phil Terry's been running in New York for 20 years, right? It's a national organization. So if you're a chief product officer at a high growth startup, you can join that community, and Phil will put you in with 8 other CPOs at high growth startups. So you have something a group to connect with. And what's really interesting is that it's private, right? It's private, and it's lots and lots of these types of organizations that do that. And the reason why I think it's important to note that it's private is, and again, it really varies kind of where you are in sort of the hierarchy of an organization. So I live in Spain, and when I first moved here, about 4.5 years ago, one of the things that I wanted to create was a retreat of it's kind of an offering, a service offering for an executive retreat. So come to Barcelona, spend 3 or 4 days with me. We'll do sort of, design thinking, agile, customer-centric work during the day, and then we'll do fun cultural experiences at night. Not an original idea, but kind of like, who wouldn't want to come to Barcelona for a few days, right? Kind of, that was my unique value proposition, right? Who's going to be like, sure, I'll come to Barcelona, right?
Location.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you got to use the assets that you have, right? And so I was confident that this was going to crush. But being the product guy that I am, the first thing that I did was I went out and I did interviews, just problem space interviews with my target audience. And my network is decent enough to where I found a few executives who gave me about 30 minutes of their time. And I asked them about this. And they said, I can't go to stuff like this. And I said, why? Is it the price tag? It was going to be expensive, right? No, it's not the price tag. Why can't you go? I can't go because anything that I do like this that is public, that includes people from other companies, and it's done in kind of a public space, makes it seem like I'm job hunting, like I'm looking to leave the company, and I can't give that perception, right? And it very quickly killed my idea because no one was going to come, right? That was the big learning. But the idea here is that people do need that network. They do need that connection. You just have to frame it in a context that allows them to take advantage of it. And I think the folks, like I was describing before, where there's sort of like what happens in the forum stays in the forum type of thing, goes a long way for some of these folks.
Well, that's when you go and target the YPO, EO, and Vistage groups and groups that are already private and say, come to my retreat facility and I'll facilitate it.
Come to get all of you. Yeah, I know those folks particularly well. And you're right. That's a great idea, right? Because they already have trust, right? You just take the whole unit.
It's already private. Yeah.
That's true.
So
you bring here.
Yeah. So I think there's something, but I see, Leslie, your question, which we'll get to shortly, and please keep the questions coming. And hello, Mr. Brian Wish, the one who connected Jeff and I. Great that you're here. So you mentioned about, gosh, it would have been 16 minutes or so ago, that it was when you turned 35, you had this panic attack, which I'll be turning 35 in April, so I can't wait. But it's either a stroke of genius, which I think it is, or a little bit of good Woody Allen neuroticness or neurosis, neurosis of sort of. I mean, I think it takes humility for you to go and look around at the younger, less expensive talent who, especially in the tech world, like surpassed your skills and knowledge and speed. And I kind of just put that out to everyone who's listening, of the humility it sort of takes to go like, oh, I see how this could end, which is I have authority and a paycheck now, but if there's a change, all of a sudden it's very hard for me to be employable because the only skills I have is leading and managing teams, which is valuable.
Yeah.
But sort of all the sort of recency things that you had junior in your career disappeared as tech moved quicker. And so it's just, so I think that the question from it, which I think we've touched upon a little bit, but maybe to get more granular, is I hear you saying, well, focus on what is in your control and work on that. So can you walk us through, and I know there are tenets and principles and sort of areas in the book that you unpack, these forever employable skills, but can you walk us through like, okay, so if someone's sitting here being like, well, I think this is a worthwhile conversation to have to, cultivate opportunity to come to me rather than me trying to chase it once I'm stuck. What are the things that are in our control to add to our toolkit, both on the technical side and the human skills side, to become forever employable?
Yep. So control is exactly the right way to frame this, right? So let's think about this. We're gonna think about this in a systems thinking approach for 30 seconds. Bear with me. I swear it's not going to be terribly technical, right? But if you think about a traditional career path, right, from a systems thinking approach, it's a push model. Well, what I mean by push model is that you are pushing yourself into opportunities. You are searching for a new opportunity. You are sending your application. You are sending your resume. You are, and then you are ceding control to the people, to the HR, the recruiter, the hiring manager, the organization. Will they pick me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Will they read my resume? Will they pick me for an interview? Will I come in for a second round or a third round? Will I get the job? Right? You're leaving all of that outside of your control. Right? Everything that I talk about in the book is designed to turn that model 180 degrees, so that instead of a push system, what you're creating is a pull system. Everything that you're doing professionally generates a pull on, and when I say the system, I mean your domain, your industry, your network, your community, your audience, right? The people that you work with, right? And everything that you do is generating a pull on that draws something towards you, whether it's a person, a new friend, a new professional contact, an opportunity to speak at a meetup, an opportunity to write a blog post, be a guest on a podcast, whatever it is. But the idea is that everything that you're doing is deliberately designed to pull on that system, and then you have the control back to decide which ones of these am I going to take advantage of, right? And maybe it's none right now, right? Because you're happily employed and everything is great, right? But if and when that changes, those things are still coming in, and you're saying, well, I'll take this and I'll try that and I'll do this, right? Yeah. So that's the goal, right? So control is a really great way to frame this, right? Because what I'm absolutely trying to do with the material in the book, and it's at the risk of overselling it, right, is to give you back control over career opportunities, just opportunities, right? Let's just it's broader than just career opportunities, but opportunity, right?
Nice.
And so then how, right? Let's talk a little bit about how, because we've talked about it in the abstract. Let's get practical. So first and foremost, I want you to use what you know and what you love and what you're passionate about as the foundation for developing these pulls on the system. One of the exercises, so really this is really interesting. So the first step in the Forever Employable in the book is plant your flag. Now, plant your flag simply means that you're going to decide what is going to be the foundation for your community. What in your community, in your network, in your industry, what are people going to know you for? Right. So like we like Seth Godin, he's the marketing guy, right? We know that. Ariana Huffington, she's journalism, right? She's all about like what's going to be the thing that you are known for, and you're going to plant your flag. And a lot of folks people get stuck at all the steps, but step one is typically is a tough one, because people say, well, I don't know. I've been a project manager for 20 years. What do I know? Right? You know how to be a project manager, and you've got 20 years of experience doing that, right? And so there's an exercise that I discovered after we published the book, unfortunately. It's a Japanese exercise called Ikigai. Now, the original Japanese version of it is a lot more spiritual and emotional. There's a westernized version of it that I actually really like, which makes it a bit more practical. From a job perspective, and there's a version of it on my website you can see. And Ikigai asks you 4 questions. Okay, first question is, what do you love? Right. So what are your passions in life? Right. Professional, personal passions. What do you love? Second question, what are you good at? Right. Because what do you love and what are you good at? Not necessarily the same thing. Right. I love basketball. I'm terrible at basketball, right? Stuff like that, right? Yeah. What do you love?
Yeah. What do you at least limits some job categories. You can still be a personal trainer and analyst.
Basketball player.
Yeah.
Not going to happen, right?
Nice.
What do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? Which is a really great thing because that's going to change over time. Yeah. And what can you get paid for? Mm. And the idea is it's 4 overlapping circles. So it's a really pretty diagram with colors, right? The idea is that you answer the questions individually, and then the goal is to find an answer or 2, maybe even 3 if you're particularly lucky, that ticks all 4 boxes, right? Something that you love, something that you're good at, something that the world needs right now, and that you can get paid for. Yeah. And if you can find at least one or a couple of those things, right, that's a great place to start to put down, to plant your flag, to put down a foundation and say, I'd like to be known for, like, for example, I'll give you my example. I come from the tech world, and I was a design manager in the tech world as the tech world was transitioning from kind of a traditional waterfall software development model to an agile software development model. Very popular. Like every organization is agile these days. No one knew how to do design in an agile world when I was leading design teams, right? I had the opportunity to try it out, to figure it out, and my team and I and some other folks came up with an answer, right? That's where I decided to plant my flag. Why? Because I genuinely loved it. Like it was doing better design work. I was good at it, not only doing the design work, but leading the team and telling the story. The world needed it. It's an ongoing need in every company that builds software, which is every company these days. And I could certainly get paid for it. And so that ticked all 4 boxes. That's where I planted my flag on, and we called it Lean UX, right? That was my first book. And that's what I became known for. And if you Google Lean UX to this day, I'm the Lean UX guy, right? Because that ticked all 4 boxes. But that's where to start, right? And it's not an easy exercise. You might have to do it a couple of times, but that's a great place to start.
Nice. That's really good. I'm translating it. I mean, I know I left my corporate track when I was 24, 25, and I was both so unqualified to lead, but yet cared so much about leadership and culture, and had been part of cultures where I felt uninspired, unmotivated, not psychologically safe, unfulfilled. And so I found what I loved. I was working on what I was good at. I'm a big believer in to what you said, Jeff, to the death of corporate culture. Organizational and societal culture is in need of improvement and more of a human focus, and get paid for it. So that's a nice Ikigai. That's a really good exercise. I love that. Very cool. So there's a couple questions that have come in through here, which are great. Here's one from Leslie. I'm struggling to get through to interview level, trying to move from public sector communications to the private sector, but it's hard to get recruiters to see the possible skills transfer. Jeff, do you want to give a first go at this, and I'll add in anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, and so look, given the context that we have, which is what was just on the screen, right? I'm gonna answer. I think the most important skill set, and I'm proud that I've transferred this skill set to my children. Honestly, is storytelling that you can have here, and I talk about it in the book. I talk about it in my writing. I've taught it. I teach it. I think if you're struggling to get through from public to private sector, the story isn't resonating, right? In my opinion, right? And so the question is, well, how do you improve the story? Well, you improve the story by thinking about your target audience, right? So who are you telling the story to? And what problem are you trying to solve for them? And that story might change, right, depending on who you're talking to in the interview, in the hiring process, right? So for the HR person, maybe it's one version of the story. When you finally get to the hiring manager, right, then it's a different version of the story. But it's really thinking through, right, who are you talking to? What problem are you solving for them, right? How are you going to make them the hero of this? And rehearsing that story so that it comes across naturally in a compelling way. And to me, that's the focus in this, because I think if you can nail that part of it, and look, and you know, like even if you're doing an HR screening, you can look a person up, you can talk to some folks maybe from inside the company, just getting any kind of an insight that says, look, I know this organization. Somebody tells you, like we talked about, like in our community, right? I know this organization, and they are, they've been struggling to retain people, so we know that that's happening over there, right? How do you build that into your story that makes it clear that you're going to stick around, right? Or something along those lines, right? To me, there's a storytelling element that could use improvement there.
Nice. I'm just going to put it back up. I have a couple additional thoughts as well. So, Leslie, some other thoughts that come to mind is despite how good the job posting and job boards are, we still know that at least 70 to 80% of jobs are found through networking and relationship building. And so I think the more you can go from behind a computer screen typing to in front of people now on a computer screen, meeting people live, getting feedback, there's probably a disconnect as well between the language you might be using, because they might be seeing you as a public sector employee and hard translating that to a private sector. So you have to actually use the private sector language such that they can see that the skills are transferable. It's not fair for you to have them do the translation. You have to do the translation for them. And I'm a big believer in where else has this problem existed and how have they solved it. This problem that you're experiencing exists for military professionals. And it's a good a good day to reference that. At least here in Canada, it's Remembrance Day. In the US, it's Veterans Day. Military professionals have very particular language that is hard to translate into the private sector, but is it ever valuable? And so there are many organizations, and indeed veterans themselves, as they go on this transition from leaving military life to rejoining as a civilian, there's a translation that needs to be done to ensure that the skills are indeed transferable and are communicated, to Jeff's point on story, in a way that it's not a risk for someone to hire you or bring you in because they see that you can bring value. So story, network, and do the translation for them. Don't have them do the translation because they won't be able to.
Yeah, two great examples. So there's a lot of ex-military folks in the world that I work in, the Agile world particularly, and General Stanley McChrystal, Team of Teams, right? He translated that conversation. One of my favorites is ex-nuclear sub-commander L. David Marquette. David Marquette is
Marquet. It's pronounced Marquet. David Marquet.
He lives in New York. It's Marquette. No, just kidding.
No, he lives in Florida now. It's Marquet.
He does? Is it Marquet, really?
It's Marquet.
Oh, man. No one's ever. I've been saying Marquette for years. No one's ever corrected me.
He's brilliant. He's talk about empowerment. But keep going. I want to hear your.
Yeah, no. I love his storytelling. Right. So he was a commander of a nuclear submarine and was the worst performing submarine in the fleet, and he turned it around into the best performing submarine in the fleet. And he wrote a book called "Turn the Ship Around," which is amazing, right? And he to Stephen's point here, right? He took the military language that he was using, and he translated it into managerial language. And the success of that has been exponential because his experience is amazing, right? And so the success of of his consulting career has been tremendous. And I'll tell you one quick lesson, right? So I used to be a touring musician years and years ago. And if there's one of the most painful and important lessons you learn when you're a touring musician is you never let a better band open for you, right? You never let a band that's better open for you, because then you have to go on after them and you're not as good as they are. I gave a talk once at an Agile conference in Ottawa, in Canada, and
was it Hatfield?
David Marquette?
Hatfield? Okay, it was Marquet before you, yeah.
Marquet. Sorry, and I had to follow David Marquet, and I thought I had pretty good stories. I used to work in the circus. I was a touring musician. I was getting ready to tell all my circus jokes and musician jokes, and he gets up there and he's telling nuclear sub stories, and there's nothing you can do to beat that. So you're just screwed, right? So don't let a better band open for you. If there's anything you take away from today's conversation, Right.
I heard there was a friend of mine who's a stand-up comedian, and they were reminded because they were going to do live stand-up for the first time in like 2 years, and they were told that there is not a finite number of laughs, which I really liked, meaning there's infinite laughter. Like if someone before you goes and is a better comedian than you, it's a tough act to follow, but there's no finite amount of laughs.
Right. Right.
Which I like as well. But yeah,
that's really good advice. Actually, I really like that.
yeah. So and I also, a friend of mine, Mark Bowden, gave a talk right after Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut, gave a talk, and he was giving a talk on, I think Mark's talk was really around like nobody really cares to know how you're feeling. It's like an interesting sort of perspective. He's like, you really want to know how I'm feeling? I'm just giving a talk after a frickin' astronaut. This is not
right. Right.
Cool. All right. Great. And I saw, Leslie, that you're military comms, so very relevant. We have another question here from Christy. Christy says, when connecting and conversing in your network, where do you draw the line between business and personal info exchange?
Yeah.
Jeff, you want to kick it?
I will give it a shot. Look, it's tough, right? I'm speaking for, like, and again, I'm going to speak from my perspective. So let's be clear about what my perspective is, right? It's male, white, heterosexual, right? Like the most mainstream, right? And so from that perspective, I generally feel comfortable mixing sharing personal information with potential business context, because I think it builds rapport and it builds a connection. I have 2 daughters. Oh, you have 2 daughters? I have 2 daughters. How old are yours? Oh, they're teenagers. I have teenage daughters, right? And so you can build a personal connection and build on top of that. And I found that to be valuable. And I don't throw that stuff out right away, right? But sometimes I'll mention it in passing, and someone will latch onto it, and then we talk about it. I do try to mix a little bit of who I am into everything that I do, right? It's not just all like, okay, chop, 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 right? There's humor, there's anecdotes, there's like, oh, I was just telling my wife this thing the other day. Okay, so that signals that you're married, right? That type of thing. I've never had any issues with that, again, because from my perspective, that rarely generates any, and if ever, any negative backlash, and that's worked well for me. But again, I will caveat that heavily, that's from this perspective.
Yeah, I'll just add on. I mean, we all know, if you don't yet know Brene Brown's work, she's an advocate for vulnerability, and vulnerability is important, and vulnerability can help us be human and connect to our strengths and power. And yet, Jeff, I'm just getting a bit of a echo. I think it's gone now. But vulnerability ought to be selective. Like, vulnerability requires context. It's not about sharing every single detail all the time. And it also requires rapport and relationship. And what's relevant and what's contextual. And are you sharing it for good reason? Like, for example, I could hop on a business meeting and say, hey, I just want to let you know my daughter is right here. She's not, but she will be soon. She just finished her day at kindergarten. She's with the third parent, which is the iPad, and some snacks. So if there's some interruptions, that's why. And that's right. Contextual. Talking about a rash that I have on my leg that's really getting in the way of my speaking right now. Don't have a rash. That would be not relevant. I could say I'm having some health challenges. I'm actually going to turn my video off or something, But I think it's based on context. And if what you're sharing helps the human in you connect with the human over there, great. And I have a bias that I want to work with people that I could be friends with and treat as a friend. And that's how I engage in business interactions. And if people don't want to do that with me, I may not be for them, and that's okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation today with a colleague, and we were discussing an interaction that we had earlier in the day with a client, and the feedback that my colleague told me was he said, I thought you were too polite with them. And it was interesting because he and I had this discussion and went back and forth, which is like you, I prefer to be on friendly terms, right, with the people that I work with, regardless of the nature of our professional relationship. Like these people are not my friends, right? And I don't know that we're going to be friends. Maybe, who knows, right? But the point is I prefer to approach things from relationships from a position of friendliness, and I would like us to feel like we are friendly towards each other. And so I will do things like you said, like I'll share those kinds of anecdotes and to build that rapport, to humanize myself, right? I'm not just this machine that spits out this particular expertise, right? There's a whole bunch of more to me, and I don't mind sharing that if it helps us have friendlier, more polite, which I ultimately believe lead to more productive conversations, right? So that's personally my approach. But it was a really interesting discussion.
Nice, very cool. I see, Matthew, you shared the reference on Jeff's site for Ikigai. Thank you for doing that. And yes, everyone, if you want to hear great stories on how to improve your leadership and how to actually create cultures where people feel empowered, because empowerment is not a program, empowerment is a feeling, and it requires leaders giving their power away. Check out David Marquet's work. Turn the Ship Around is his first book. He has a second book called Leadership is Language, I think, which I've heard is really good as well. Here's a couple more questions here, and then we can wrap up. Christy asks another great one. What if where you want to plant your flag meets 4 of the 4 criteria, but the pay is not comparable to the work? So it seems like it meets maybe 3.5 of the 4, maybe not completely on that 4th one. I mean, I can just start really quickly, Jeff, which is, in this time of great resignation and great talent swap, and this time where so many aspects of our life through COVID have been stripped, that we've kind of had like home, family, friends, whether they're in person or not, and then work. And I think, we used to live for the vacation and for the date night and for the going out with friends. And all of that was stripped away and we were left with work. And I know for me personally, and many people, particularly those, working as knowledge workers, we are willing to take a pay cut to be part of a team, culture, and organization where we feel that we have flexibility, where we're valued, seen, all the things. So it's more of a question up to you, Christy, of do you want to accept that? Is that enough? Or if it isn't enough for you, we'll then keep searching or say yes to it for now as you look to fill that 4th bucket of pay a bit more as well. But Jeff, I'm sure you have more brilliant things to add on to that as well. I'm sure you've dealt with this question before.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a great question, and it's a fair question as well. I think one thing is to think about, well, okay, great. How can I, if I found something, my Ikigai that ticks all 4 boxes, but the pay box is less than I hoped, what else can I do? Right? There are other ways to supplement that that income. So let's assume there's a full-time engagement in there somewhere, right? What else can you do to because you found this Ikigai to generate other streams of revenue, right? So is there, again, you can write a book, you can
do an online course.
Yeah, exactly. Do an online course, do some consulting on the side, right? Are there other things that will allow you to use that Ikigai to generate other revenues? And the nice thing about that is because of the pandemic, it took away a lot from us. But one of the things that it gave us is reach, and a kind of a leap forward in time, in my opinion, of the acceptability of remote learning, remote consulting, remote teaching, remote interactions. And so there's a tremendous, and also asynchronous communications as well. And so I think you've got a tremendous opportunity there to say, okay, great, I've got my full-time job, which I do, and it's paying me 2/3 of what I used to make. How do I make up that other third using that same level of expertise? Because you've got evidence that that your Ikigai was spot on, right? If we treat our Ikigai as a hypothesis, right? You have evidence that it works, right? You got paid for it, you love it, the whole thing. You're just not getting paid enough, right? So what other things can you add on to supplement and maybe even get greater than the whole?
Nice. Amazing. And yeah, I also think we're in a conversation of how much income is enough. I mean, we know studies are in that, your happiness doesn't increase after a certain point. So get to the point where you have the, as Seth Godin calls new rich, which is freedom and flexibility. So very good. Two more questions, Jeff, if we can fit them in quickly, and then we'll wrap up here. Alejandro asks, and hey, Alejandro, in the exercise of identifying the things you can take to use in other endeavors, how can we improve our ability to identify transferability in our human and technical skills to improve the outcome of the Ikigai exercise you were mentioning?
Yeah. So this is great. I ask people this all the time. I ask people, what problem do you help people solve?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the first thing they say is, I'm a project manager. Okay. What problem do you help people solve?
That's what you do.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. What problem do you help people solve? I manage projects. Okay, great. What problem do you help people solve? I help bring projects in on time and on budget. Great. Why is that hard? Right. Well, because we've got a diverse mix of folks. We've got, different suppliers. I've got 3 different languages to deal with, 10 different time zones. Great. So you bring together a diverse group of people in a shared effort to achieve some kind of a goal in a predictable way. Right. Right. All of a sudden, right, it's kind of like the 5 whys exercise that comes from lean thinking, right? All of a sudden, I've talked you through to the actual thing you help people do, right? The actual problem that you solve for people. I take a diverse group of folks who are and help them achieve a common mission in some kind of a reasonable, predictable time frame, something along those lines, right? Terrific. That's transferable.
Nice.
Right. That is transferable. You can do that in any discipline, in any industry.
Beautiful.
Right. So that, to me, that's one of the things you really have to challenge yourself is, what problem do I help people solve, and really kind of keep pushing until you get to the actual thing that's absolutely transferable across industries.
Wonderful. The only other thing I'll add on top of that, Alejandro, before we go to our last question is, it's hard to read the label on the jar when you're inside the jar. And so this is the value of these questions that Jeff just asked, is it's very hard to do that on our own without a guide or without a structure to follow. So I'm a big believer in assessments like StrengthsFinder and Insights and all these things that help us learn more about us, because we can take our own strengths for granted and our own skills for granted. Like, I draft emails and social media posts in the shower. I think everyone does this. It turns out they don't. Because I have this strength called communication, where I'm obsessed with finding words to express ideas and feelings. That's just my jam. And apparently other people aren't as good at that as I am, so that's something that I'm good at doing. Checkbox on that second Ikigai model. So get outside yourself, whether it's through feedback with others, with peers, having an objective coach and objective questions to follow, or assessments like StrengthsFinder and the like. Jeff, I feel like this is a really good final question from Matthew to help round us out as we're nearing the top of the hour here. And thank you again for joining us and giving us all of your wisdom. Not all of it, but a good amount of it. Maybe it's all of it. Who knows?
That's it. I'm out.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see if we can squeeze more out of the orange here. What have you found to be the most impactful when building a community over an audience? I love this question. I'm eager to hear your thoughts, Jeff.
Yeah, and I was having this conversation with Zoe earlier today as well. So community building is really hard. Audience building is easier, because audience building is one to many, right? It's me broadcasting. Maybe I can respond here and there. Community building is difficult because it's not intended to be one to many. It's intended to be a group discussion. And so if there's one thing that I've noticed that actually makes a community more successful, it's size. And honestly, for me, in my experience, the smaller the community, the more successful it's been. People are just more likely to interact. They're more likely to be more vulnerable, more intimate in those conversations. And the bigger that it gets, the less people interact on their own initially. That's been my experience. I know that's not true universally, but that's been my experience.
Yeah. I'll just add on top of that, which I think is brilliant, Jeff, that you can have a huge audience with very little engagement. You can have a very
Yeah.
small community with very high engagement. Something that I obsess over. I love posting on LinkedIn and posting my ideas. And my favorite part is seeing the comments that come in with people adding ideas, challenging my ideas, asking questions that I then get to answer. And then that springs the next idea for the next post. That's part of community for me. And when I see someone like Alejandro's a great example. Alejandro and I have never met. He's engaged in my post on LinkedIn. After a while, he kept liking and commenting and like engaging in it in awesome ways. I just connected with him and sent him a note and said, I really appreciate all what you're bringing to my posts. We've never spoken live, but we have a nice exchange. Haven't spoken live yet, but we have a nice exchange over LinkedIn where we've shared a bunch of messages, audio notes, things back and forth. I consider that more community engagement, or at least audience engagement, than just simply building an audience that is not very engaged. So I think, Jeff, from more of a sort of a micro, how do you build relationship with a small group of people? But also, Jeff and I have decent followings on these social platforms, and yet, I work very hard to engage with people who engage with me, as opposed to being one of these people that just posts and then doesn't do anything with it. That doesn't add that much value, in my opinion. Well, Jeff, it has been such a pleasure. The website is foreveremployable.com. A bunch of books, the most recent being Forever Employable. I also know you have an on-demand course that you're launching in a couple of weeks. How else can people engage with you? What else do you want to leave with us before we say ta-ta today?
Yep. So on Forever Employable on-demand video course comes out in a couple of weeks. It's in production now. That should be up on my website. Foreveremployable.com will take you there. And then LinkedIn. LinkedIn's fantastic. Connect with me there. Say hello, and I'd be more than happy to connect and chat over there. I'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Jeff, such a treat. Everyone, thank you for joining us live, for your engagement and your questions. And for those who tuned in on the recording, hope you enjoyed. See you around the LinkedIn halls. Take care and have a great day.